Hi friends, my name is Angela and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you to everyone who's joined recently. I think my unhaul video, there was quite a few new people who have jumped on to subscribe. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm glad you're here. And today I'm going to go through, we're going to do a tag video. I haven't done a tag since my very first video, which was the BookTube newbie tag. This one is the nature tag, which I was tagged. I couldn't say tag anymore in this intro. I was tagged by Kim from Middle of the Book March, and I love watching Kim's videos. She was so welcoming when I joined the BookTube community, and if you don't know her, please jump over and check out her videos. So we're going to do the nature tag. This is a really interesting tag, and I think the reason I chose this one, other than some other tags that I've been tagged in recently, was because it really resonated with me, and mainly because when I first started my channel, I thought I was a historical fiction girl. And that was what I was going to read like 80% of the time and share that with you. And I am, and I do love that. But I've also come to realize over the last few months how much I love nature books, whether it's a nonfiction book or a book that has nature as a real prime, as a character almost in the book. It's really something that I'm gravitating towards more and more. So that's kind of why I wanted to do this tag. I do admit that I'm drawn to English writers, and I think part of that when it comes to nature is because when I grew up in the desert, and we didn't have a lot going on up there. Very low bushes, lots of sand, the ocean, but also animals were snakes, spiders, and kangaroos. There wasn't a lot of other wildlife. So anyway, quite often we would holiday in England where my mum's family is. And when we were there, it was just such the polar opposite of where I grew up. You know, there were acorn trees, chestnut trees, squirrels, rabbits just running through the fields. And it was such polar opposites of where I grew up. And so then, because also my mother is British, I would read a lot of, I was reading Enid Blyton and things like that. So there was always that as a real heavy focus in my reading life. So when it comes to when I think about nature books, I always will gravitate towards those books that are set in England. And while I'm okay with that, I do want to read more Australian authors and more Australian stories. So this tag has really helped me. I've added so many books to my TBR because of this tag. Authors I've come across that in my research, looking at who are the nature writers in Australia, where are they based, what are they writing about, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. It's been really great. So thanks, Kim, for upping my TBR just from this tag alone. I'll also admit that most of my answers are less about revolution when it comes to climate and nature, and more about appreciation. I'm not generally reading books about environmentalism and climate change. I'm reading books that are just set in nature and appreciate nature and journeys through nature. So while there isn't like a flat out red flag, this is, an environmentalism book, there is always an element to that kind of thing when it comes to reading nature books. So these books are not very political in that sense, but they are beautiful nature books, and they are the ones I'm going to show you them now. So the first question is, what is your favorite book that has a heavy focus on nature in any genre? And after giving you the caveat of my history with England, I had to choose The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. This takes you through all the seasons. It starts off, of course, in spring when our friend Mole is doing his spring cleaning, and he just decides he wants to be outdoors and he wants to be enjoying the weather. And I get it. I understand that. And he ends up going on a journey, and it takes us through more seasons as well. He goes into summer and then through into autumn and winter. And this is just such beautiful writing. So this is most definitely one of my favorite books that has a heavy focus on nature. And another book that I chose was The Offing by Benjamin Myers. This was a recent read. I read it last year while we were traveling through Europe, and it was quite a warm summer in Europe last year. And I just really enjoyed this one. It was my first book by Benjamin Myers that I read. It's about a young boy. He's 16 years old, and he is about to become a coal miner, just like his father is a coal miner and all of the generations before were. But he decides to go on a little bit of a pilgrimage of his own, and he ends up on this coastal town in northern England, and he meets this woman, Dulcie, who is worldly, she is experienced, she is knowledgeable, and she teaches him about life. And a lot of that life has to do with the seasons, with nature, with eating seasonally, and it's just a beautiful little book where nature really is a big part of it. So I recommend this one. And the cover was, this is why I bought it. I bought it for the cover, and thankfully the book matched the cover. The next question is, which book gave you a wake-up call, climate or otherwise? And like I said, I don't have a lot of political, environmental kind of books, but the one that jumps to mind is Clan of the Cave Bear by Jean M. Ale. And the reason I chose this one, I think, is because I read it when I was a teenager initially, and I think it really helped me understand the connection between us and the land. And so if you're not familiar with the story, this was written in, I want to say 1980, and there's 7 books in this series, I think, maybe 6. This story is set in prehistoric Europe in the Ice Age. And it's about a young girl named Ayla who is orphaned after an earthquake, and she is adopted into a clan that is not her people. You can see that they can see that she is different to them physically and mentally, and it's a really interesting journey. I think the book was written over 3 years of solid writing every day. The research is so well done. And the element of the earth the series is called Earth's Children. These are people who are living off the land. The family she is adopted to within the clan, her matriarch is a medicine woman, so she becomes a medicine woman as well. And so it's just the healing nature of the land is so present in this book, as well as how dangerous it can be. And I just think that it's something that we don't have to experience that now. But these are people who are traveling long distances to go hunting particular animals. And it's just there's this seasonality and this respect for the land that they have. It really helped me understand that connectedness that we as humans have to the land. Like I said, I read this when I was a teenager, so it really helped form that opinion for me. So that's what I chose for that question. The next question is your favorite book cover that features nature. And the first one I've got a few because I've got a few books, is Upstream by Mary Oliver. This is a beautiful little book of essays, poems, quips. Mary Oliver is such a beautiful writer. And this one is a collection of essays about being lost in nature and in literature as well. So it's a bit of a duality. I started reading this book last autumn, and then I read a particular essay where Mary Oliver, and I don't know how metaphorical she was being, but there was a particular essay about her drinking her cat's milk, and not like the milk for her cat, but the milk from her cat. And I was like, I don't know how metaphorical that particular essay is. And it kind of like, I just wanted to put it down and just walk away for a moment. So I've picked it up again this autumn because clearly it is an autumn vibe. I've read so far like her relationship with Walt Whitman, who is another great nature writer and poet. But the cover is most definitely one of my favorite nature covers. Another one I've got, which is not nature strictly, but it's this beautiful cover from Old Herbaceous by Reginald Arkell. And this was the part of the Modern Library Gardening series. I shared a book with you in the last video, and this is one of their editions as well. And it's just such a nostalgic little, it fits the story perfectly. I really love that one. And then I've got 2 more, I think. So this particular one is a poetry book, and it's from Batsford. And while the cover is beautiful, the illustrations within are just magical. It is poetry just about birds from all sorts of different poets. There's even some Shakespeare in here, I think. But it's just so beautiful, so beautiful. So I love this one, and I love looking at these images. And another one is The Naturalist of Amsterdam. And Melissa Ashley is an Australian author, and I think she's in Queensland. And her books all have a similar thread of science and nature. There's definitely something about that. So The Naturalist of Amsterdam, and her other 2 books are The Bee and the Orange Tree and The Birdman's Wife. I think she's also written some poetry, but look at these end pages. They are just so beautiful. The illustrations are lovely. So this is actually on my TBR at the moment. And the short summary of this is, from the jungles of South America to the bustling artist studios of Amsterdam, The Naturalist of Amsterdam gives voice to the long-ignored women who shaped our understanding of the natural world, both the artists and those who made their work possible. That was beautiful. I mean, It's not often as adults we get books with beautiful pictures in it, so that's why I'm kind of drawn to them. So the next question I have is a book that discusses revolution and change. And like I mentioned, none of these are really political, but this one is probably the closest to it when I think about something that really discusses change. So this is Why Women Grow by Alice Vincent. I read this year for the first time. It's a beautiful book. It's a non-fiction book. Alice Vincent essentially put out a call on social media or her blog or something that said, contact me if you want to talk about why women garden. And so she had a number of people around the United Kingdom reach out to her, and that's what this book is a result of, her traveling around and talking to them. But there was an element in here about race and gardening, which was something I had never really thought of before. And so let me see if I can find it. The passage was, to have a garden is one privilege. To have time, means, and confidence to tend to it is another. And to ignore the political structures that have enabled both is a third. And there was a statement in here saying, a survey by Natural England established that black people were 4 times more likely than white people to have no access to outdoor space from their homes. 4 more times is a lot, just the idea that where I live, we have parks everywhere. I have a backyard, I have a front yard, but I know there are places that people don't have access to that. And it kind of made me think about that a little bit more, that yes, what I have is a privilege and a blessing, but in many different ways than what I might have thought initially. So that was a really interesting element that I took away from this. So this one definitely discusses a little bit of change because it talks about the women who are trying to change that and how they're trying to bridge that gap, whether it's about race or about class. So that was why I chose that one. The next question is, do you read outside? If yes, where is your favorite spot to do so? I love to read outside. I will read outside in winter, in spring, any time of the year. We have a beautiful outdoor area. So in summer, I will most definitely sit in the pool and read a book. At the moment, I just like to sit outside in the morning sun and I've got a blanket on me and the dog nearby. And that's where I like to be. But there's a beautiful spot on our back deck where I can turn one of our lounges into a day bed and it gets the afternoon breeze, which is just perfect in summer. So outdoors, yes. I actually had a thought the other day that I think I just want to get a book and go to a local park and just sit down and read a book. Like when I was a kid, I would climb a tree and read a book. And while I may not do that at this age, I could see myself most definitely just packing up and going and taking a picnic blanket and just sitting down somewhere and enjoying a nice day and reading a book. So I think I may do that. But yes, I'll read outside, anywhere, anytime. The next question is your favorite Indigenous author or book. And this is where I started to see a gap in my reading, which is something I've wanted to repair for a while. It was when I started the YouTube channel, I knew I wanted to read more Australian books, and including more Indigenous authors. I read books for pleasure and for education and for knowledge and empathy, these are journeys that I want to go on. But I do know that I need to push myself to read some topics that perhaps I haven't read in the past. So I'm aware of that and I'm wanting to change that. But I'm also not going to sit down and force myself to read a book that I'm not resonating with. There needs to be a common thread or something for me. So that said, one of my favourite Australian Indigenous authors is probably Leah Purcell. It definitely comes to mind. Leah wrote a play called The Drover's Wife I think it was around 2016, which was then turned into a novel and since turned into a movie. And the story itself is based off a short story written by Henry Lawson, who was undoubtedly one of Australia's most popular writers in the late 1800s. He wrote that particular story. So she took this story of his about the drover's wife, and the story is essentially about a woman who has 4 children. She's in the outback. I think she's in the Snowy Mountains, which is in New South Wales. And she's alone. She's alone and she's managing her children and living day to day in this really, really difficult landscape while her husband is away droving. And droving is essentially herding. It's where you're walking animals from one area to another across lands. And so Leah took this story and she gave it a new slant through an Indigenous lens, using her own history, her own knowledge of her people, It was a really interesting story. I really enjoyed it. You get lost in that story. I think the subtitle is The Drover's Wife, The Legend of Molly Johnson. So she gave her a name. She introduced other characters that were based on her own ancestors. And anyway, that was a great book. I highly recommend that one. And in the movie, she played Molly Johnson. So she wrote it. She was incredible. She's incredible. So a book I do want to read, which is by an Indigenous author called Victor Stephenson, is called Fire Country. And it's about, I think the subtitle is about how Indigenous fire management can help save Australia. Bushfires in Australia are catastrophic, and we've had some incredible ones over the last few years. Last year, I actually evacuated my own home here because there was a fire much too close for my comfort. So it's a real thing. It's in the forefront of everyone's mind. So this book sounds like a really interesting read. And this is this is the summary. Delving deep into the Australian landscape and the environmental challenges we face, Fire Country is a powerful account from Indigenous land management expert Victor Stephenson on how the revival of cultural burning practices and improved reading of country could help restore our land. There's an element about how fire is essential in Australia, that regular burning creates growth and it's required. So anyway, it sounds like a really interesting nature and science-based book that I do want to read. And the next question is a book that takes place outside or features nature as a character, such as an animal or a tree. And the one that came to mind for me was North Woods by Daniel Mason. I don't have a copy of it with me at the moment, but I read it in January. And I still think this may be my top book so far of 2024. The nature writing in this book is just exquisite. It is so, so good. And while I don't think it has one particular character, but I think this environment itself is a character. So there is a cabin and a house in this woods in New England in America, and this cabin we see it go through generations of people over, I think, 3 centuries. The woods around it change. The plants that they planted in the early establishing days of this cabin have changed as the centuries go on, just because the environment changes, because of climate. Initially at this cabin, they planted apple trees, and the apples were unlike anything anyone could ever get anywhere else. And then over the years, that changed. They were never as good, and it's clearly a climate discussion. But I definitely recommend that one. The environment was a key character in that story. Animals, trees, the cabin itself, but that particular pocket of land was a key element. Which book genres do you associate with each of the 4 elements: air, earth, fire, and water? I was a little daunted by this one because I thought I can't figure this. It sounded very hard, but it wasn't that hard. For air, I would associate that with mystery. There's just, I don't know, like it just felt like that enveloping of mystery, an air of mystery, if you like. Earth, I would associate with nature writing, most definitely. Fire with romance, and water with poetry, the fluidity of language, of words. That's what I would associate them with. We are all connected. Name a book that brought you community or made you think about community. And the one that I would most definitely think of is At the Pond, Swimming at the Hampstead Ladies Pond. This is a collection of essays, and it's all essays about this bathing pond in Hampstead Heath in London. And this is most definitely about community. You've got people that are going to this pond for decades, and then other people who are being introduced to it for the first time. It's a beautiful selection of essays, and it's set over the seasons. So you have a number of essays for, summer, spring, autumn, and winter. And it's most definitely about community and about nature, and I highly recommend that one. And I'm getting into this one now, which is by the same publishers. It's called In the Garden, Essays on Nature and Growing, and I'm really enjoying it. It is about gardening and gardens more specifically. But I read one earlier, which was by Jamaica Kincaid, who's a novelist. I've come across the name so often recently, and I really do want to read her books. She is a gardener and an essayist and a novelist, and also one in here from Nigel Slater, and his writing was lovely. So from a vegetable gardening, home gardening perspective, I think that his writing is lovely. So this is one that I'm enjoying at the moment. And the last question is, have you ever participated in Climathon, or are you planning to? And I have to be honest with you, and I have never heard of Climathon before. I've only been on YouTube for 5 months, so I have not come across it before. I assume it is reading books about the climate. I don't think I would participate in that because I find it difficult to read from a prescribed list. I like to just read books that take my fancy at particular times. But that said, I most definitely will be reading more books about the climate and about the environment from a more political perspective, perhaps, to help become an ally for the earth and to understand a lot better of what we're going through. And I do have a lot of books that have just been popping up on my TBR lately that I want to read. I've been listening to the Slightly Fox podcast, and they have such a great reference of recommendations. And one of the podcasts I listened to was with Sarah Langford, who has, I think that the book is called Rooted, and it's about regenerative farming. And it was such an interesting topic, and it led to so many recommendations of books from other authors I hadn't heard about, and some I had that I hadn't yet read. So I'm starting to kind of, I think over the winter I might be reading a few more of those sort of environmental books, whether it's about farming or gardening or nature in general. But thank you so much for joining me. I'm not going to tag anyone in particular. If you want to pick up this tag and do it yourself, I highly recommend it. It was a really great exercise in looking at a genre that I know I like to read, but also seeing that perhaps I need to be invested a little bit more and stop maybe not so much on the surface, really dive deep. If I like this topic, I can get further into it. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to, please jump on it and let me know, tag me in your video if you do it as well. But otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead, and I will see you next weekend. Bye.